Hello, West London Alliance Church family. This is Wednesday morning staff meeting. My name is Lyall and I'm the associate pastor at the church, and it's just great to be able to be with you today. These have been interesting times we've been in, and these last 10 or 12 weeks have been challenging for many of us. The sense of normalcy is long gone, and we are on the verge of new things. Speaking from a worldly perspective. But what I'd like to do today is I'd like us to take a few moments and look back. And look back at these last 10 or 12 weeks where we have been in self-isolation, where we haven't met as a church family, where we have been practicing social distancing and wearing gloves, wearing masks, whatever we need to do. So I'd like us to look back. But I'd like us to do this with a purpose. All through Scripture, we can read where God reminded the children of Israel where they had come from. He reminded them of their past. And we can see certain chapters in Scripture that speak of that. And God did this for a couple of reasons. He did this to remind them of who they were, that they were the children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And he reminded them of where they had come from and how God had brought them through certain periods of their history as a nation to where they are today. He also reminded them of these things because he wanted to show them who he was and the kind of God that he is and he was to them. And he also did this to remind them of the faithfulness of their forefathers, of the men and women who had gone before them and shown their faith in God and who he was, the Abraham, Isaacs, Jacobs of their nation's history. So one of the pieces of Scripture that I would like us to look at is found in Joshua chapter 4, verses 21 to 24. And here the nation of Israel has crossed over the Jordan River. And they're in the promised land for the first time. But God has them take 12 stones out of that Jordan River and set them up as a memorial. So that when their children ask, what do those stones mean, they could tell them exactly what it means. So what I'd like us to do today is to look back over these last 10 or 12 weeks. And I have about 4 questions that I'd like you to process, to work through. And these are just to kind of get the juices flowing a little bit, to get your mind thinking. What has this been all about? What has God shown me? And maybe you need to write some things down. You need to write some things down as a memorial so that one day when your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren are able to read about your life or hear about your life, they're able to see what happened during this time and how God shaped you during this time. And it can be a very powerful instrument that God can use to bring people closer to himself. So today I want to have us look back. And I want us to start by reading this passage of Scripture from Joshua chapter 4, verses 21 to 24. So let me read those verses for you. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So these these stones that the Israelites were to set up it was not idol worship. This was just a reminder for them to fear the Lord, a reminder of them of what God had done, a reminder of, as it says in that last verse, that the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. So here's what I'd like us to do. I want to ask you 4 questions, and I want you to think back over these last 10 or 12 weeks that has transpired in our lives. A time when we have had to self-isolate, a time when we experience social distancing, a time when we have not met together in body as a church family. We've been meeting, of course, over the internet, avenues such as this, Zoom meetings, different kind of things, but we haven't met together and fellowship together as a church body. So I want to ask you 4 questions, and these questions might be something that you want to do as an exercise with your family, that you might want to do with your children, with your teenagers. And I think it can be a very valuable exercise for you, and as you share about what God has shown you over these last number of weeks. So the first question that I want to ask you, and you might want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, is what can you give thanks to God for? As you look back over these last 10 or 12 weeks, what can you give God thanks for? 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, "Give thanks in all circumstances." So we are to give thanks in the good times, in the bad times, in the hard times, in the ugly times. We're to give God thanks in all circumstances. So you might want to spend some time writing down, what can I give God thanks for? As I think back over these last number of weeks, what can I give God thanks for? Question number 2, what life lesson has God shown you during this time? Now, it might be that the life lesson that you have learned is patience, and patience with your family. Some of you have been in the household, you haven't been able to interact with anybody, your kids haven't been able to play with anybody. It's been an exercise in patience, and maybe God has been teaching you that. Been patient as you have gone out and you've had to go buy groceries, and you've had to work your way through the winding avenue that they have set up to go into the stores. And then it's patience as you're waiting in line to pay for your groceries. Or maybe it's patience as you've stood in line at a bank and just have had to endure that. Maybe it's faithfulness. Maybe the Lord has been teaching you how you can have more faith in Him and be able to trust Him more. Maybe it's the life lesson you've learned is living your life in the security of Jesus instead of the security of the world. And maybe you had a little bit too much security in the things of the world before this. And now you've learned that I need to live my life more in this security of Jesus. So what life lessons has God shown you? The third question is, how have you suffered in these last few weeks? This is a bit of a hard question, because sometimes we don't like to talk about our suffering. We don't like to talk about the things that have been hard. But I think it's a very important exercise to do. How have you suffered in these last number of weeks? Some of you, you've lost your job. You're not going to work every day. You've been laid off for however long, and you don't know when you're going to go back, and you've suffered from just having to not go to work every day. Some of you have lost income. Some of you have suffered that way. Some of you are suffering because you're not with people, and you're lonely. You're maybe a little depressed, and you haven't been able to get out and interact with people, especially at the church when we've had to shut just about, everything down except what we're doing on social media. And we just don't have that one-on-one time together, and you miss that. You've been suffering through that. Some of you have suffered through the death of a loved one, and that has been a very difficult, challenging time for you, as even to do a funeral isn't the way it's normally done. And so you've had to suffer through that. Some of you have suffered through, again, I come back to this word security. You just don't have the security that you had maybe back in January or February. And you're suffering through feeling that security. And, when investments have gone down, the economy kind of has ceased in many different ways. Even with our jobs, we're not even sure what our jobs are going to look like when we go back to work. We're suffering from that security. And so what are those things that you are suffering from? And I encourage you to just write those down. And finally, moving forward, I want you to think about this. As you move forward, how can I be still and know that He is God? I hope during these last 10 or 12 weeks, when life hasn't been quite normal, we're not on our normal schedules, that you have been able to carve out time to be still and know that He is God. And maybe for some of you, you haven't. You haven't done that. You haven't taken the time to be still. And this is where I challenge you. How can you now, moving forward, create the time in your schedule to be still and to know that He is God? So these are 4 questions that I want to leave you with. Again, 4 questions that you might want to take and adapt and talk to your family about, and just spend some time sharing how God has been working in your life. But it might be something too where you can write these things down, and you set it up as a memorial to what God has done, so that in the generations to follow you, with your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they can read about this time in your life, and they can see how God shaped your heart and shaped your mind to conform to His image, and how He used this time for you to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. So I encourage you with those words, and I encourage you as you move forward to continue to think about your relationship with God, to work at growing in Him, to work at being a disciple of Jesus, and spending time in the Word and praying, and spending time with Him. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you, and may the Lord be with you.